5th of January. That was the last session we have done, and that was session number 17 on the Gospel of Mark. So we begin with session 18, and this is going to be Act 2 of the Gospel of Mark. If you can recall, when we were doing the previous sessions, when we were taking up the structure of Mark's Gospel, remember I told you the entire Gospel can be split into 3 acts. You have Act 1, you have Act 2, that is the middle section of the Gospel, which is also called commonly the way narrative, because that is a narrative in which we find Jesus going several places, and he seems to be on a sort of a journey towards Jerusalem. So going from there, he comes finally to Jerusalem. That is the place where he finally suffers his passion and ends up ultimately with his triumphant resurrection. So that goes into Act 3. So from now on, we will be taking Act 2. But prior to that, just let us, do a quick recap about what we have done in the previous session. Remember, Jesus has been, the part 1, that is Act 1, has entirely been the Galilean ministry. And Jesus has been, crisscrossing the terrain of Galilee. Galilee had mountains, it had plains, it has valleys, and we find Jesus undertaking all his journey on foot along with his disciples. So here I put out a picture from the previous session. Remember, this is the Syrophoenician woman, when he goes to Tyre, he comes in contact with this woman who comes and pleads for her daughter. And similarly, these are all the, portraits that we can see about Jesus, how he went about healing all the people and proclaiming the kingdom of God to the people in Galilee. And not only Galilee, also beyond, we see he is going also into the region of the Decapolis, that is the region of, the Gentiles basically. And also up in Tyre also was actually a place that was beyond Galilee and all. It actually is in today's Lebanon. So that also was seemingly a Gentile territory. Not that there were no Jews over there, but there were very few Jews, but basically it was a very flourishing sort of a township where Roman colonies were there. They were primarily Greek-speaking people, So this is just a sort of a reconnect from where we are going to take off now. This was a place last that we had seen. We had come across this place, Dalmanutha, okay, where this is a place that is supposed to be very close to this Magdala. Magdala was a very flourishing port town along the Sea of Galilee on the western side. Okay, these are some of the pictures. If you can recall, we have extensively gone over all this. So I'm just, putting across this frame so that it refreshes your memory. The Galilee boat which was discovered over there. Okay, this is the place. This is a slide I've taken up from the previous presentation, just to bring to your mind how we have gone through all these things, how this town of Dalmanutha, which is known only from the New Testament, we know this is the place that Jesus goes to after he performs the second bread miracle where he feeds 4,000 people. These are the pictures that we had shared earlier. I'm just putting them out again. This is the text of the Gospel, okay, chapter 8, where the demand for the sign is made by the Pharisees. And then Jesus, okay, he leaves them, he's angry with them, and he goes into the boat and crosses and goes on to the other side along with his disciples. And how the disciples, this is the episode where the disciples, they are, talking among themselves, and they realize they have not carried any bread with them. And they are so very, worked up as to how, they will be able to, carry on without having any provisions with them. And Jesus hears this conversation, is very much agonized, because just prior to this, not only one but 2 miracles in the wilderness, he's already performed mighty deeds of power before their very eyes. Okay, literally from something very small, few bread and fish, he has multiplied, and 4,000 and more and 5,000 and more people have had their fill. And yet they are so worried as to how they will be able to have bread. And that is the time Jesus is posing them a series of questions. In fact, if you count the questions that he poses to them, okay, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not perceive or understand? Are your hearts so very hardened? Do you have eyes and fail to see? Look at the way the questions are, lined up in a series. It reflects the agony Jesus feels that in spite of his disciples, not only the 12, Mark's favorite phrase for the apostles is he does not use the word apostles in his text. He uses the 12. So not only the 12, but the other core disciples also who used to go along with Jesus. Okay, but especially the 12 fail to understand because they are the inner group, they are the inner core of Jesus' disciples. And though they are there with him, Jesus is, has built his intimacy with them, and yet despite witnessing up close and personal what Jesus has done before their eyes, they still are not able to make the connection that Jesus is actually the fulfillment of the hopes that were given to Israel. So this text of Mark is actually a sort of a foreshadowing of what is going to come. Then it ends with the cure of the blind man at Bethsaida. This is in fact, as you can remember in session 12 we have done, this is the only instance in which Jesus has to, touch the eyes of the man for the second time. A second touch is required over here. Okay, I will not be going into all this because this is just a recap. But here, why the second touch is required? It is like, like Mark indirectly wants to tell us that gradually the disciples, the core of Jesus' team, they are coming to the realization of this very important episode that we will be touching today about the confession of Peter, which is supposed to be the pivotal episode we will be touching in Act 2. So this is a foreshadowing of what is going to come. Their faith is evolving, but still it is not enough. So, in that episode of the Bethsaida miracle, where Jesus has to, first when he he touches the eyes of the man, okay, who is blind, he is not able to see clearly. When Jesus asks him, "Are you able to see?" So he says, "No, I feel like as if the trees are moving." What he means to tell us is he has a very blurry vision. So it is indirectly, it is symptomatic of what is going on in the lives of the 12. They also are gradually coming to this realization of who Jesus really is, his identity and his mission. Okay, and probably Mark is trying to juxtapose two important scenes whereby where the Pharisees, they appear to be very adamant because they were demanding a sign, and Jesus angrily walks away from them and gets into the boat and takes his disciples and goes away. The Pharisees are adamant because they feel that Jesus is an agent of Satan and he is performing all these deeds of power with the power of Satan. So just as they refuse to see, they refuse to acknowledge that whatever Jesus is doing, it is through the spirit and power of God himself, of Yahweh himself, that Jesus by implication is himself Yahweh. They fail to see this. But in the same way, the apostles, despite being close to him, living with him, sharing in his life deeply, they also seem to be equally dumb and insensitive to the divine presence of Jesus. So just like the Pharisees, they too fail to make the connection between the shepherd who cares for them in the wilderness, has provided them with food, okay, just like in the Old Testament we find Old Testament echoes here over here, like how God provided manna, okay, to the wandering Israelites when they were coming to the promised land. In the same way, Jesus here is the shepherd of Israel. He is the shepherd who cares for his people. So definitely it is impossible that he will not provide for them what is required for their bodily needs. Okay? So they fail to make this connection, and Jesus is deeply troubled by this. So when Jesus is asking them, "Do you not see? Are your hearts so very hard?" Okay, hardened. In fact, it is like as if the disciples, are telling him, "No, okay, we still, sorry, we don't understand, not yet as yet. Okay, so we'll go further now. So when Jesus was talking about not seeing and comprehending in this way, it is a dramatic preparation for the healing of the man who cannot see. So that is a connection. So I'll just take the point down. I'll read this out. The man sees unclearly. He has very blurry vision, just like the naive, faith-lacking 12 who have continued to follow Jesus and have seen things without really perceiving. Seeing physically, but not not being able to draw the connections, you really lack perception, and that is exactly what is happening here. And that is the reason Jesus needs the second touch. Okay, a second touch of Jesus. Sorry, a second touch of Jesus in the form of again restoring sight so that he can see it clearly. That is needed. So it is a metaphor of what is going to happen to the disciples also, how they will come to full understanding of what truly Jesus is, and we will be seeing that in today's episode. Before we go to that, I'll remind you the structure of Mark's Gospel. In fact, we have done this in session number 9, but I'll just run you through 3 or 4 slides so that you have a quick recall. Do you remember? We know that Mark is when he is writing the gospel of the text of his gospel, he is shaping the narrative depending on the eyewitness testimony of Peter's oral preaching in Rome. Okay, I hope you have not forgotten this. Mark is actually writing, his audience is the church in Rome, probably the persecuted church in Rome. We have gone through all that. So when Mark is picking up all these, pieces and episodes, probably he might have, been a sort of an eyewitness himself, but for a very limited time. We are not very sure. But most of the narrative material that is there in his text, it is shaped from Peter's oral preaching, that we can be absolutely certain. So when he has carefully designed the story of Jesus for his hearers, he has crafted the whole narrative, dividing it into sort of 3 acts, which seems to be very obvious to modern scholars. And that's what we call the 3 acts. Act 1, as you all know, we have completed this. It is all set in Galilee, which is commonly called the Galilean ministry. And the focus of the entire narrative in Act 1, that is from chapters 1 right up till chapter 8, verse 26, the entire focus is slowly we come to an understanding of who Jesus is. Who is this Jesus? So Mark is, taking us into a journey whereby we get familiar, we come to know what Jesus is, his identity. And everyone seems to be very blown away by who he is. Okay, so who Jesus is. But in Act 2, that is the way narrative, on the way it is called, which covers chapters 8, okay, from verse 27 right up to chapter 8, verse 52. The entire focus of this part of the narrative is, what does it mean for Jesus to be the Messiah? All throughout in Act 1, we have, been witness to all the glorious deeds of Jesus, an awesome display of his power which he draws from his heavenly Father. We see all those big, series of miracles that, Jesus works as a miracle worker, wonder worker. But in Act 2, as he's going towards Jerusalem, which is going to be ultimately the place where he will triumph through his resurrection, prior to that his death. Okay, the way narrative is more an entire discourse on discipleship. If broadly in one line, if we can say, what is the crux of the whole thing here in Act 2? It is Jesus, he's drawing his disciples very close to himself, and he's further taking them, okay, revealing his true identity. Some of the things can be very stark, like for example, it is in this Act 2, we also come to learn about the transfiguration. Okay, and finally then he goes into Jerusalem. That is the final act from chapters 11 to 16. So the whole focus of Act 2 is what it means to be a Messiah. Okay, what is the meaning of being the promised one, the anointed one of God? And the final act is how Jesus finally becomes king. Remember, the underlying theme of entire the Gospel of Mark has been the kingship of Jesus. True kingship, okay, totally different and in total contrast to what kingship in the world means. So this is the entire structure of the gospel. So I've taken you through this so that we know where we are headed. So in Act 1, as I told you, we learn about who is this Jesus. Okay, the gospel of Jesus Christ, Son of God, the very first line makes the claim that he is the Son of God. There are no two ways about it. Many times people, in the past, they used to think that Mark's gospel, and for that matter, in general, the synoptics, when we talk about the synoptics, it is the gospel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Okay, collectively, we know that we call them the synoptics. Okay, the synoptics will not make the claim that Jesus is directly the Son of God, but that is not the case. We have already seen how Jesus, he does not come anywhere and say, I am the Son of God. You will not find that statement. But we do find that statement made by the high priest in the passion narrative. We will come to it. When Caiaphas asked him, are you the Son of the Blessed? And what is the answer Jesus gives? It is as you say I am. Okay, so it is not that Jesus goes about saying, I am the Son of God, I'm the Son of God. But through his deeds and through his actions, he is implying who he really is. That he is indeed actually an embodiment of Yahweh himself. Okay, so very first line of the gospel makes this very astounding claim. So we have seen all this in Act 1. Going to Act 2, what we will be doing now, the way narrative. What does it mean for Jesus to be the Messiah? This is split into three major conversations and finally into a culmination. Today we will be doing conversation 1, that is Peter's confession, chapter 8, 27 to 8. And then you have these, okay? And then finally, the Son of Man did not come to serve. This is the climatic statement that he makes after these three proclamations that he will be making about his passion predictions. This is a picture I just put up. Coming to Act 3, then finally how Jesus becomes king. Okay, we have all this 1 to 5 parts, and then finally the 6th part, that is the crucifixion, death, and resurrection. This is the main thrust of today's session, Act 2, on the way, Mark 8, 27. Okay, onwards, we will not be able to cover up the whole thing, but the first conversation we will be taking. Before we take up, this is commonly called the way section of the entire gospel. There are two ways of looking at this, okay, this entire narrative about the way. We have the geographical, okay, the geographical thrust of the entire thing, the way how Jesus goes about, I will be explaining here. And you have the theological slant, the understanding, the deeper meaning behind it. When you look about, when you look at the geographical outreach of this entire narrative, the way section, it runs from the northernmost area of Galilee to Jerusalem. Remember, this whole thing is Galilee. This is the Sea of Galilee. We have been constantly focusing on this. This is the entire region of the Decapolis. Okay, this is the Golan Heights, the Golanitis in those days it used to be called, present day it is called the Golan Heights, okay, which is part of Syria today. And here you have Syrophoenicia, Tyre and all, where Jesus went, and he had an encounter with the Syrophoenician woman, and how he performed that miracle restoring his daughter back to life, okay, to good health. So from here, from Tyre, he has been going all these ways here, okay. Finally, today's this episode that we will be talking about, it is concentrated here at Caesarea Philippi. Okay? This is the place where Peter's confession takes place. And all this while Jesus has been, trudging up and down this whole area, up and down, up and down. He's also gone here to the Decapolis, crossing the Sea of Galilee. He's gone here to Scythopolis. Here, you know that Gerasa is a place he had gone and performed that miracle, restoring that demoniac, and how that entire herd of pigs went down the cliff. So all these things have been happening over here. So from here he has gone back and forth, back and forth. Today he comes here to Caesarea Philippi. It is away from the villages of Caesarea Philippi through Galilee, then on into Judea, with a further journey up to Jerusalem via Jericho, finally arriving at the Mount of Olives that is in Jerusalem itself. So that is what, because he is constantly on the move and then finally going towards Jerusalem, it is called the way narrative. In this particular narrative, this entire section of the Gospel of Mark, the way, you will not find any, those miracles at the sea, in the wilderness, how he performed those miracles of multiplying the loaves of bread. All those things, what was happening in the wilderness and at the sea, you will not find it here. The movement is steady and it gathers momentum, and you will find Jesus finally going down here. Judea is not seen. Judea is right down to the south. They had to go through Samaria in order to come down to Jerusalem. But most of the time the Jews would avoid going through Samaria, because that was, the Jews and the Samaritans always, they were at loggerheads with one another. Each one claimed to be, having the correct legacy of Judaism. And so the Jews from Galilee would avoid going through Samaria. Rather, they would cross in, they would come this side, cross the Jordan, and from this side via Jericho, they would come towards Jerusalem. So let us go now to the more important than the geography. I told you there's a deeper meaning beyond the geography for the way narrative, and that is the Christology. When you talk about Christology, Christology is a term about the messiahship of Jesus. Christ, is the Greek word for Mashiach in Hebrew. So when we talk about Christ, Christ means the anointed one. We have touched upon this earlier, so I will not go more deeper into this. So when we talk about Christology, about it actually means the claims of Jesus being the promised Messiah. So in this entire way narrative, the focus and the emphasis is on Jesus being the Messiah, being the Christ, which finally Peter will confess. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus shifts his focus from the crowds to the intense schooling of the 12. Okay, I told you, in the Galilean ministry, we have seen how the crowds were, literally pushing against him, so much so that he used to not have any time to himself. He had to literally draw his disciples to himself and run away from the crowds in order to school them. But here, as he's on the way and he's going towards Jerusalem, you will not find in Mark's narrative, Mark reporting to us that the crowds were pressing against him. No longer you will find this. It is Jesus along with his core 12 members who are there with him, and probably also others who were there. We definitely know there were women or disciples who were accompanying Jesus, and when he went to Jerusalem, they were always there with him. Definitely we know that Mary Magdalene was there. Joanna, the wife of Chuza, who was he was the steward of King Herod. His wife also was one of his disciples, and so too there were many other women disciples. So Jesus was going along with them, but the teaching was confined to the 12. What was he doing? He was preparing them, because he knew his time was drawing near, and his mission had to be carried on further into the world by the 12. So this is the schooling session. Jesus is the rabbi for them. He is, imparting them intense training. So that is why the entire focus is on discipleship and on training of the 12. The focus of his teaching shifts from the reign of God to the question of his own identity and faith. And the stress is on his eventual powerlessness. See, there's a complete contrast over here. In the way narrative, you will not find too many instances of display of great power. Jesus is stressing more his teaching, and what teaching is he imparting his core group? He is emphasizing, that he must suffer, he must die on the cross and then be resurrected. So this is basically the entire crux of the teaching that he's imparting his four disciples. Do you think it must have been easy for them? All throughout they have been managing. Like Jesus, I told you, was as good as like today's rock star, like a superstar with throngs, pressing around him, and the disciples had to literally micromanage him. But all this is not there. And now all of a sudden, in the quiet of the place around it that we will be talking about now, Jesus is talking about powerlessness, he's talking about suffering, he's talking about death. So this sounds very alien to them. They thought that he is the Messiah, definitely, he is the chosen one of God. So their expectations of Jesus was that he would be a Messiah, a worldly one, who would come to establish his reign, in which they also would have positions of power to be wielded and displayed. But that is exactly what Jesus is drawing them into understanding, trying to open their eyes that this is not what I have come for. The continued inability of the 12 to comprehend the full extent of his messianic mission and identity, the redefinition of messiahship, and the true implications of his pending death and resurrection pose challenges to true discipleship, which Jesus puts in his best efforts to prepare them. So the entire way narrative, it is structured, if you say in one sentence, it is going around, it revolves around the three passion predictions which Jesus will make, and that forms the fulcrum of this entire section. So we go down to the first section which makes up the way narrative, Mark chapter 8 verses 27 to 38. Okay, so this is here. They go to a place called Barnias, which is also called Caesarea Philippi. This is the text of the gospel, okay, from verse 27 right up till verse 38. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" First, what does he ask? Who do people say that I am? And they answered him, John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets. So, very curiously, when he poses this question to them, they are very enthusiastic and they are telling, what is the murmur that is going on among the people all throughout Galilee and the areas surrounding. And they tell him that. And then when, they are excitedly, chattering and telling all this, he asks them, but who do you say that I am? Peter answered him, You are the Messiah. And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Okay, so this is what we will be doing about today. So in Mark's gospel, Mark is very forthright, as we have seen. He has a very dramatic way of narrating things. He's very blunt in putting things. He will sort of not paint a very beautiful imagery and all. But the same episode is also there in Matthew's gospel, and Matthew gives a beautiful flourish to it. He says, "You are the Son of the living God." Okay, you are the Messiah, Son of the living God. And then we have that famous narrative which is not given here. Okay, Mark does not tell us, only Matthew tells us, where Jesus tells him that you are the rock on which I will build my church, and I give you the keys, okay, that nothing will be able to prevail against you. The gates of Hades will not prevail against you. That famous episode there in Matthew's gospel. But that is not related here in Mark. But in here we have just a very small one. First, what the people are calling Jesus. We are already aware how many of them thought that he's an embodiment of Elijah come. Some were saying that he's John the Baptist, like famously even King Herod Antipas also had a fear that it was the spirit of John the Baptist rejuvenated again back in Jesus. So all these things were doing the rounds, and so that is what the disciples are telling. But Jesus throws a bouncer at them. That is what the people say I am. But what do you say about me? What am I to you? And Peter, on behalf of the 12, he says, "You are the Messiah." Let us go back now to this and let us see. This is supposed to be, a very watershed moment. In fact, this passage is supposed to be the bridge passage. If in fact the entire Gospel of Mark can be divided in just two sections, this is, the binding one that will, stitch the first part with the second one. Why it is so? Because the way this confession comes about, just two lines, and we feel like, when we don't go behind the context of how this has occurred, if we don't know what is the context, we will fail to catch the importance of this beautiful confession that Peter makes. When we talk about Caesarea Philippi, you need to know what this place was and why Jesus specifically, probably, okay, why does he pick up this place in order to pose this question to his disciples? Let us see what this place is. This place, Caesarea Philippi, it was actually called, okay, Banias. Actually, the word comes from Panias. Panias means that word Panias comes from god Pan, the Greek god Pan, half goat and half man. So down the ages, from that word from Banias, it became, Banias, they say they must have mixed up the word Pan along with the god Baal. You know this Baal, no? That's a very common god of the Old Testament. The fight between Jezebel and her prophets along with Elijah. So Baal used to be the god of all this, the Phoenician god. So down the ages, this god had, sort of evolved, and when Hellenism came here in the surrounding areas of Judea, also in Galilee and all the syncretistic religious cults, they sort of, they fused into one, and that's how this name has evolved down from Panias, it became Banias and all, and finally we had this name being changed by Herod's son, Philip. Okay, Herod Philip, he's the one who changed the name of this place, calling it Caesarea Philippi. He named it after himself, and he named it after Caesar Augustus. Because after his father died, Herod died in the year 4 BC, and in 2 BC, when his kingdom was all divided among his sons, remember, there were tetrarchs, 1/4 of the part was given to each of the sons, like Herod Antipas also was a tetrarch. Similarly, Herod Philip also was a tetrarch because 1/4 of the part was given to him. So this was a region that was under his control. So this was a region which was outside the territory of Herod Antipas, and Herod Antipas was, we can be absolutely certain when Jesus was talking about the Pharisees and the Herodians, who was he referring to? He was referring probably to the people from Herod Antipas's palace, all the officials there. So they were the ones who were always conniving with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all. So they were the ones who were afraid about Jesus. Why? Because they felt that Jesus was probably an embodiment of John the Baptist. Okay, so Tetrarch Philip is the one, when he became the ruler of this region belonged to him. He named this territory Banias, Panias, whatever it was called Caesarea Philippi, naming after himself and Caesar Augustus, because that time he was still the reigning emperor. And this place is 25 miles away from the Sea of Galilee. So this is exactly the northernmost point that Jesus has traveled. Beyond here, he has not gone. So this place is supposed to be at the foothills of this beautiful mountain called the Mount Hermon, which is in today's Lebanon. And it is at the foothill, this entire city was a very beautiful city that was built by not only Herod Philip, prior to him, it was also his father, okay, Herod the Great, who had built up a beautiful temple to Caesar Augustus, and that's how that whole region had become a very lucrative region. They say that this is in fact one of the most beautiful sites in the whole of Israel. So this place is at the foot of this Mount Hermon, okay, and there are two very important features, geographical features of this place. One is that there is a cave over here which was considered to be very sacred to god Pan, and more so because there was a spring that flowed from here, from the base of the mountain, and that is a reason. This was considered to be a very sacred spot for the pagans who were residing in the city of Caesarea Philippi. This abundant water supply has made the area very fertile and attractive for religious worship, and that is why there were many shrines to the god Pan, not only to god Pan, many other gods also of the Greek pantheon. And so this was a place that was considered to be sacred to the pagan populace. Numerous temples were built in the city in the Hellenistic Roman period and also beyond. So definitely when Jesus has gone over there, okay, today that place that was built by Herod the Great, there was an entire white marble temple there in that place, which came down. There was an earthquake somewhere in 323 AD something, okay, 300 years after the church was already established. And so today you only get to see the ruins over there, and it is one of the very famous tourist attractions for people who go visiting there. So during the Hellenistic period, it's important that we know a little bit about the origin of this place. Only then we will be able to, know the deep understanding about the confession of Jesus and how Jesus makes the big statement over here appointing Peter as the head of the church. During the Hellenistic period, that is from the time of Alexander till the time like in 31 BC, when this entire region went on to the Romans, this city was originally called Panias, also called Panias because of its close association with the Roman god Pan. It's not the Roman god Pan, it is the Greek god Pan. Okay, the Roman god, he was considered to be, the same as the Roman god Faunus. So that is the other name for this god. The modern name Banias is an Arabic corruption of the original. In 2 BC, one of Herod the Great son, Philip, renamed it Caesarea in honor of Emperor Augustus, in order to distinguish it from the harbor city of Caesarea Maritima. This was a very huge city, okay? Caesarea Maritima, this was entirely built by Herod the Great. So in order to distinguish this place from this city of Caesarea, which later on became a very important Christian center, okay, in early Christianity. So in order to distinguish these two places, one was called Caesarea Philippi and Caesarea Maritima. Maritima means it was along the coast, okay, and that is why along the Mediterranean coast, that's how that name is given to the city. A cave immediately to the north of Caesarea Philippi was said to be the birthplace of the Greco-Roman god Pan, also called Faunus, the god of nature, fields, forests, fountains and all. So this place was something that was very sacred to the pagans, as I told you. Why? Because this was a shrine. There were many shrines here to the Greek god Pan. And who was this god? He was the god of the flocks, of the shepherds. He was a god of the forest, the wilderness, and also of music. That is why whenever you see pictures of Pan, I've put it out in the next slide, you will always find him with a flute, that is playing the flute. So he was considered to be, the god of also rustic music. So wherever Pan's worship was to be carried out, it always used to be, in the forest. His sanctuaries would be built. So this was a very ideal spot for a sanctuary for Pan, and that's how Panias as the place went by. It was a sanctuary for the pagan worship of the god Pan. And imagine Jesus making this claim over here. So there is something very important that has to resonate. Let us see what it is. You have to also remember that to the pagan mind, the cave at Caesarea Philippi created a gate to the underworld. The most important part of this entire sanctuary of Pan was there was a cave over there. And this cave, because it had that water hole, because there was a spring that was flowing, the connection between these two geographical features, okay, it made the pagans believe that that was a gate to the underworld. And who was the god of the underworld for the Greeks? It was Hades. Okay, Hades was a god in the underworld. So, because that cave was there, the belief among the people who inhabited that region was, that that was a place from which the gods, okay, the Greek Roman gods, whatever the Greco Roman gods, they, especially the fertility gods, okay, they would go for their winter holidays there. Through that cave, they would go into the underworld, and they would come back again in springtime. Why is it? Can you draw the connection? Because during the winter, you will not find crops growing and all. It is like nature literally goes to sleep and springs back to life in the springtime. So the belief of the pagan people was, their gods, through this cave, okay, that was a gate of the underworld, they would go into Hades for their winter rest, and they would come back again, okay, during springtime. And through what was the medium through which they would be able to navigate? It was, of course, definitely the water, the spring water there. So this was the significance for the people over there. And because these beliefs were there, you have to remember all sorts of rites used to be carried out. Some of them, very despicable, something that was very abhorrent to the Jews, because Jewish people were, very devout. They had their own practices. So, what practices used to be carried out in these caves and all? It was, it was a sort of a revulsion to the Jewish people, and it is against the backdrop of this region that Jesus is asking this question. So the whole thing, comes alive when we come to know what this place really meant. These are the pictures that I put out. Okay, this is the entrance to the cave. Okay, I told you it is at the foot of the mountain, Mount Hermon. Okay, this is that grotto of Pan, the god Pan. A spring emerged from the large cave which became the center of pagan worship. Beginning in the 3rd century BC, sacrifices were cast into the cave as offerings to the god Pan. Pan is half man, half goat, okay, which I will show you over here. This is normally, whenever Pan was depicted, this is the way he would be shown. Half goat and half man. Okay, his hinds are entirely of a goat, body only only the trunk is human, and the face is also of a goat. And here you find him always with a lute, with a flute, with a lyre. So he's supposed to be the god of flocks, god of music, god of forest, the wilderness. So that's how people would come to worship him. This is a bigger picture that I've put out. So somewhere along this place, Jesus has come. This is a modern picture. This is the cave which is called the Gates of Hades. Okay, this is the mouth of the cave where they believed that all the gods would go for their winter rest. These are the ruins of the temple which I told you that Herod the Great had built a very huge temple, not to the god Pan. He had built a temple to Caesar Augustus. They also, Romans believed in emperor worship. So there was a huge temple that was built of pure white marble. And these are the ruins that are there. These are the small shrines, okay, sacred niches where people would make, small wax. Like how today also when we go to Old Goa and all, they will make those wax figurines and all. So all the small statues and all would be made, in this rock cut shrines over there. They still continue to be over there, and these are very famous tourist attractions for the people who go to visit. So this region denoted the northernmost extent of Jesus' ministry. Our Lord could find some privacy here. So as he's taking his disciples along with him, he acquired the serenity of this place, okay, the beautiful surroundings must have spoken of a lot of peace around. And so this is a place that Jesus is investing his energy, his time into building up, teaching his close disciples of what his true identity and mission is. So here our Lord could find some privacy here in this non-Jewish region with his disciples, because it was outside the domain of Herod Antipas. Herod Antipas probably was actually looking out for Jesus, okay, was afraid of him. but yet he was always looking out for him. So maybe Jesus was also avoiding meeting this man in order not to, run into any trouble. And within the area of Philip the Tetrarch, so it was safe for him to be over here, okay, because he was beyond the geographical domain of Herod Antipas. Shortly before his final journey, he knows now he is going towards Jerusalem. His time is come and he is not having much time. So, whatever time is there at hand, he wants to make the best use of it, teaching his 12 disciples. And that's how he asked them, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter boldly replied, "You are the Son of the living God." The disciples were probably, you have to imagine, okay, Jesus is there in the backdrop of, this very scenic environment. Suddenly Jesus drops this question when they are telling him, they all think that you are John the Baptist come alive, you are Elijah, you are one of the prophets, but who am I to you? Who do you say I am? This question must have, stirred and brought about a very huge contrast in the minds of the disciples. Why? The disciples were probably stirred by the contrast between Jesus, the true and living God, and the false hopes of the pagans who trusted in dead gods. As Jesus posed this question standing near the pagan temples of Caesarea Philippi and the very entrance to the gate of Hades. You remember in Matthew's Gospel, I told you what is the remark Jesus says. He is saying, he tells Peter, "I'm giving you the keys, okay, of the kingdom of heaven, that even the gates of Hades, gates of hell means gates of Hades, will not prevail against you." Imagine Jesus making this emphatic statement against the backdrop, literally, okay, of the gate of Hades over there. So that contrast must have been absolutely stunning and striking for the apostles. Here they are, okay, people are worshipping all pagan gods, not only Pan, many others, okay, many other fertility gods they were coming here to. And here Jesus himself is an embodiment of the true and living God. So this contrast must have been absolutely very striking. As they are on the way, Jesus inquires with them who people say. I do not read this. The enormity of this moment in Mark's narrative, giving us Peter's confession about Jesus' identity, is often obscure. We tend to just read that. And Jesus said that you are the Messiah, and it's done with it. You are the Messiah. So we know that Jesus is Jesus Christ. We fail to catch, okay, the sanctity of this moment, the enormous depth of this moment. Why? Because we tend to focus on that, what Peter said, taking it like as if it was a surname of Jesus, Jesus Christ. But it is actually a title, it is a proclamation that Peter is actually making. Because up until now, no one has used the word Messiah directly, the Messiah, okay, or Christos, as the Greek word says. The idea has not occurred to anyone. This is a direct reference here where Jesus is being addressed as you truly are the Messiah. And here on the lips of Peter comes the revelation of one of Mark's key titles for Jesus. Okay, Mark has many titles for Jesus. One of them is Son of Man. But Son of God is the key title. And here, not only Son of God, you are the Christ, the Son of God, the Christos, the one that the entire nation of Israel has been looking forward to receiving. So between the series of questions that Jesus put to his disciples, remember, while in the boat as they were coming before that healing miracle at Bethsaida, so many questions he was posing. Can you not see? Can you not see? Peter and the 12 had progressed in their insight to the point that they now recognize Jesus as a fulfillment of Israel's hopes for the coming of God's reign and the time of Shalom. So this is a watershed moment in the text. Not only in the text, but in the entire narrative from the beginning to the end. Okay, this is the moment where, all throughout, Jesus has been all the time rebuking them, calling their attention, literally appealing to them. Can you not see? Are your hearts so very hard? Okay, that you fail to see. You have ears and yet you cannot hear. But here we've seen an astounding progression in their insight. Now, gradually they have come, and now they recognize that Jesus is the Messiah, okay? He is the fulfillment of Israel's hopes. But yet, there is going to be an anti-climax for this, okay? Peter's confession of Jesus as Messiah is clear and without any doubt, unambiguous. There is no two way of interpreting this, that it could be this, maybe he meant this. No, he directly says, you are the Christos, you are the Messiah, you are the Messiah. So the disciples' insight that Jesus in Israel's long for Messiah represents a very critical moment. As I said, it's like a watershed moment in this narrative. It is full of depth. It is full of something very magical. It's a very magical moment that they have arrived finally at this understanding. But is that understanding complete? Is the understanding of his true identity and mission complete? Let us see. The title Messiah, okay, the anointed one, it is a very Old Testament reference that is made. Who used to be referred to as Messiah, the anointed one, the Christos? It would be Israel's kings. They were always considered to be the anointed one, because whenever they were appointed kings, they were always anointed with sacred oil. So too sometimes priests were considered to be anointed, and sometimes also the Old Testament prophets, though sometimes not maybe with proper oil as such, but anointing directly coming from God's consecration of them to the prophetic ministry. Like for example, Samuel. Isaiah, tree to Isaiah, when we talk about the prophet Isaiah, there are three of them, okay, whose works have been fused into one work, okay, the work of prophet Isaiah, which spans into 66 chapters. So when we talk about Isaiah 61, it is the third Isaiah. We call this prophet third Isaiah. In this 61, okay, Isaiah, when he talks about, Israel's promised Messiah, he is not only talking about, in the legacy of Israel's past kings. Sometimes also like, a foreign king like Cyrus the Great of Persia, who allowed the exiles also to come back to Jerusalem. He is also spoken of as a Messiah, okay, in Isaiah 45. That is first Isaiah, second Isaiah, sorry. He calls him also an anointed one. But when Isaiah 61 calls him, remember this is a very famous echo wherein he says that, when the promised Messiah comes in, it is like, that people will no longer fight with one another. It is like all the swords and all, they will be forged into plowshares and pruning hooks. Okay, sheep will sit alongside wolves, and, the lambs will be comfortable. So that sort of reign of the future ideal king, when Isaiah 61 talks about it, he's talking in that sense. He's not talking about how the past kings of Israel were. And this hope, is echoed. This hope is echoed into what Peter says here, okay, in this Gospel of Mark. It's interesting to note that even in the Mishnah, that is post Second Temple Judaism, prior to the destruction of the Second Temple, which was destroyed, we all know, in 70 AD. After that, we know that, all these Jews, they have put all this, their writings together. They are all called that Mishnaic age, almost 200, right up till 400 AD. We had the Talmuds, the Mishnah, the Tosefta and all. So this Mishnah is a very huge writing on it, plenty of tractates. It's very surprising that in the Mishnah, which is considered to be, all the legal rulings and all of the Pharisees and all, they were all summed up in this and all. The Mishnah, which is supposed to be the core teaching of post-temple Judaism, even in the Mishnah, the figure of the Messiah plays no role at all and is mentioned just twice in its tractates, and the tractates are used. But look at in our New Testament, okay, Jesus being projected as the promised Messiah is huge. And why in the Mishnah and all the Jews, they don't want to talk about this messianic figure anymore, because they know that it is this messianic, fervor that finally brought about the downfall of the second temple in 70 AD. And that is why the Mishnaic sages, that is all these sages of the Mishnaic period of the Targum and the Talmuds and all, they desist from talking about the Messiah because they don't want to talk about it anymore. But for early Christianity, Peter's confession of Jesus as Messiah gathers into itself all of the religious and political yearnings and hopes of the people of God, and claims that they are being realized in the words and deeds of Jesus. Okay? When Peter, on behalf of all of us, when he tells Jesus that yes, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God, in that one, okay, proclamation Peter makes on behalf not only of the 12, but on behalf of the entire church of God which was to come, that includes you and me as of today, in that echoes all the religious and political yearnings and hopes, okay, of all of us, of who is to be the ideal ruler. Okay, the ideal ruler being the one, the reign that is inaugurated by Jesus being the Son of God. If the disciples' insight that Jesus is Messiah represents a watershed moment in the narrative, the subsequent announcement of Jesus, we will come to this, okay, in verse 31 is a shattering one, a stunning admission, a sort of an anticlimax to the messianic proclamation. How did Jesus respond when he said, Peter tells him, okay, that you are the Son of God? Jesus does accept it, but at the same time, he makes the first passion prediction. Okay, Jesus now says without parable or riddle that it is God's will that he should be killed and after a short time be raised from the dead. Okay, when Jesus says this, what does Peter do? Okay, takes him aside and he tries to, persuade Jesus to desist from it. He rebukes him. We will see that now later. Son of Man here, when it is used here in this, in that text here, okay, by the time Mark was writing, when Son of Man came to be used, it was also a substitute for I, okay. By the time that Mark writes, the ideas of Jesus' humanity, his prophetic obedience as is contained in the book of Ezekiel, his role as an apocalyptic agent in the book of Daniel in chapter 7, what we have done, his suffering, all of them came to be absorbed into this very enormous expression, okay, saying that the Son of Man will have to suffer when Jesus is talking about himself. And from this point on, the cross and resurrection of Jesus dominate the story in Mark. Yet it is this emphasis on suffering and death that the 12 are unable to grasp. The same insight that led Peter and the others to confess Jesus as the Messiah now leads to stiff resistance. I think I will just take you to the text of it. Just bear with me because I did not read that out, because this will not make sense to you until I read that out here. Yes, here. When Peter makes that proclamation, you are the Messiah, and he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about it. And after that, Jesus foretells his death and resurrection. So here you have a very astounding claim. Jesus accepts it. But here, after that, he comes out, he throws a bouncer at them. This is totally like a contrast. When Jesus accepts that, this is the proclamation that Peter has made on behalf of the 12, Jesus seems to be accepting it. Peter will be very surprised at what Jesus tells him here. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes. This is the first time Jesus directly, without mincing words, there's no parable, there's no riddle, he uses words point blank and he tells them what exactly he means by them. The chief priests, the scribes, they will all gather up and he will be killed and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly. And what did Peter do? Peter, the same one who, very mightily proclaimed him as a Messiah, took him aside and began to rebuke him. Look at the word used by Mark. Rebuke him. He actually started scolding him. What are you talking? You have accepted that you are the chosen one of God, and how can you talk about, that you are going to be killed? But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter in turn and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called a crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my word in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." For us, it is important that we focus only here, okay? Till here, verse number 33 on. Okay, how Peter tries to rebuke him, and Jesus in turn rebukes him and tells him, "Get behind me, Satan." Now let us see what exactly is this. It is this emphasis on suffering and death that the 12 are unable to grasp. It is not only Peter, but all of them. And that is the reason Peter took him aside. The same insight that led Peter and the others to confess Jesus as the Messiah now leads to stiff resistance to the idea of his violent death. They were, so happy when they confessed that he is the Messiah. But this is very hard teaching, difficult for them to stomach, difficult for them to digest. Okay, and that is how Peter puts up resistance. And not only Peter can be on behalf of all of them. We only know that Peter is saying this one because Mark is Peter's secretary, of course, so he is reporting from the perspective of Peter. In a private chat assigned from the group, Peter rebukes Jesus and is in turn rebuked. Peter regards Jesus' talks. You can imagine, Peter must be wondering, all confused, what are you talking? Okay, you who are supposed to be an embodiment of the Son of God, which you just accepted, how can you be talking about, like that you will be put to death, and that too by the scribes and the people there in Jerusalem? This is sheer madness. So this talk of his impending passion appears to be madness to Peter. Just as what Peter says, okay, Jesus also considers it to be very demonic. That is not the idea of God. On the other hand, Jesus regards Peter's resistance as demonic, and that's how he uses that very harsh, statement, "Get behind me, Satan." Turning to the rest of the 12, he then goes on to redefine discipleship in the light of his radical redefinition of messiahship. So you see, when he turns back, that entire speech that he gives to the 12 and some of the others who are there, what is he actually doing? He's redefining not only discipleship, he's also defining what true messiahship actually means, what it truly means to be a Messiah. Messiah is not going to be the one, no doubt, as Jesus himself said that he will be like the apocalyptic agent in Daniel 7, coming on the clouds of heaven in all glory. But there's a deep underlying meaning. All that will happen only after he has paid the ultimate price with his own life. So Jesus is trying to orient the minds of his core disciples towards this ideal, trying to prepare their minds and hearts to this difficult, moments that are going to be in his life. It implies then that if the Messiah is to be a suffering Messiah, destined to the cross, the follower and the disciple too must be prepared to share the same fate and to partake in his exaltation and future glory. Glory definitely is going to come, but before the glory will come the cross. And if we are going to be true disciples of Jesus, we have to be part of that. We have to be part of that passion and death too. So the final challenge in this entire episode, okay, at Caesarea Philippi, Jesus' challenge, imagine, this is what he is throwing up, not only to them, okay? Since time immemorial, we can, imagine that we have been there, okay? He has imagined the entire people of God, okay? And Peter is representing all of us, and Jesus is throwing this challenge to us. And imagine against the backdrop of a place like Caesarea Philippi, which was a hub and a bustling center of paganism. Don't you forget that at the time when Jesus was here, at this spot, when this whole episode was happening, this was a very flourishing center. It is only after the earthquake that entire temple and all was destroyed. So this magnificent temple to Augustus and all was standing. This sanctuary of Pan and all was very much over there. And against the backdrop of this mighty power of the pagan world, Jesus is throwing this challenge to us. Jesus presented a clear challenge with his words at Caesarea Philippi. He didn't want his followers hiding from evil. He wanted them to storm the gates of hell, literally so, with that cave being the gateway to Hades. Standing near the pagan temples of Caesarea Philippi, Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter boldly replied, "You are the Son of the living God." The disciples were probably stirred by the contrast between Jesus, the true and living God, and the false hopes of the pagans who trusted in dead gods who were all around them as this scene was unfolding. Jesus continued. This is very beautifully brought out by Matthew, but since it is in this context, I am just taking this. "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it." Imagine Jesus saying this, literally against the backdrop of the gates of Hades. Throughout Christian traditions, okay, as the ages have evolved, there have been lots of debates about the theological meaning of these words. But it seems clear that Jesus' words also had symbolic meaning. And what was that symbolic meaning? His church would be built on the rock of Caesarea Philippi, a rock literally filled with niches from pagan idols where ungodly values dominated. So this entire, it is like Jesus declaring a war on the world, okay? A world of all hollow values, a world that is dominated by false beliefs in pagan gods, okay? So gates, in ancient times, gates, had a very deep meaning. Gates were defensive structures in the ancient world. By saying that the gates of hell would not overcome, Jesus suggested that those gates were going to be attacked, okay? Jesus has already declared war on Satan, on Beelzebub, remember, in the past episodes of it. So standing as they were at a literal gate of Hades, the disciples may have been overwhelmed by Jesus' challenge. They had studied under their rabbi for quite some time, and now he was commissioning them to a huge task. And what is the task? To attack evil and to build the church on the very places that were most filled with moral corruption. And Jesus in this episode presented a very clear challenge with his words at Caesarea Philippi. He didn't want us, his followers, hiding from evil. He wanted us to face it all, okay? And so he poses the same question to us today. Who do you say that I am? Indirectly, who am I to you? Okay? People will say n number of things, and he means n number of things to many people all around. But to me, okay, as a true disciple of Jesus, if I claim to be one, okay, what does Jesus mean to me? Okay, as my personal savior, what is he to me? Who am I to you? That is the answer for each of us to answer. That is a question, for each of us to answer to ourselves, okay, and give an orientation to our lives according to his teachings. That is the last slide. Any questions?